Thank you very much for joining. So in the previous sessions, we covered the 10 principal empowered technologies for spiritual leadership. We emphasized, and I can't emphasize this to you enough, we emphasize that this is the complete dharma of leadership. What that means is that if you do these 10 things and you do them well, it makes your leadership go through the roof. Okay, you do those 10 things, you do them well, you do them appropriately. That by itself makes you a great leader. Okay, it's that powerful. And these 10 principles are distilled from the Vedic literatures. What we also mentioned is that we wanted to begin by structuring the seminar by giving you these 10 points, because there's a very special system in which Vedic education differs from what we consider modern education. See, modern education, I was meditating on this morning, it was so interesting. What happens in modern education is modern education begins with the details, right? Because it starts with, it parallels this idea of the ascending process. So pratyaksha, direct perception, they'll try to collect different details and then they'll try to figure out what's going on. It's actually a suboptimal way of educating people. Vedic education, because it's descending, you see, because it's descending, it comes from Krishna. So what happens is it begins with the laws. So Krishna, it begins with the ultimate law, which is everything should be done to please Krishna, right? Why? Because Jiveras Rupa Krishna Nitya Das. That's the number one law. And everything else, even in scripture, right? We say all the other rules and regulations, they are subordinate to what? To always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. We know all the 6 principles of surrender. They're subordinate to what? We know all the principles of engagement. They're subordinate to all the rules of engagement, all the actions of engagement. They're subordinate to what? Always, accept what's favorable, reject what's unfavorable, right? So the beauty about Vedic culture, the beauty about the Vedic literatures is it's Brahminical. Brahminical, and you see this pattern throughout the entire creation. It's so interesting. Brahminical means you start with a few basic building blocks, and through those simple building blocks, you can build everything else. For example, what does Krishna do in terms of creating the material energy? It's just tamas, rajas, sattva. He just has 3 modes of material nature, and through that, everything else material is created, right? All the material bodies of human beings, Krishna, what does he do? He uses kapha dosha, pitta dosha, vata dosha. 3 doshas, and all the different human body types are produced from there, okay? You have all the colors on the spectrum in the material world. What does Krishna do? Red, yellow, blue. All the colors on the spectrum created from there. So in the same way, the Vedic education, there's always a finite number of principles, and then they cascade down. Then you combine those principles in different ways, shapes, and forms throughout the creation, and that's what creates all the variety. Now, the reason why that's so powerful is because what it means is if you just learn the key points, the key principles, then all you do for the rest of your life is you learn how to refine the application of those. It's not that there's a million different techniques that you have to learn. No, there's 10 principles that you have to learn, and then you just learn how to use those principles in different ways. It's like saying there's only 10 ingredients that you have to use, and then how you combine the ingredients determines how successful the recipe is. So we talked about that. Now that we've got those 10 buckets, those 10 key laws of leadership, now then as we go through the rest of Bhishma's instructions to Yudhisthira, now we have a framework through which we can attach these details to a particular area. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, and this is part 1. So what we've shared so far is actually just the introduction. The introduction had these 10 points about leadership. Now we're going to part 1, which is entitled The Instructions of Bhishmadev. And as we go through it, he'll be talking about why good leadership is so important, different systems of government, and maybe we'll see it. We may not get further than that. But also, if we do get to this point, he'll also speak about the value of a divinely inspired monarch. Okay, so maybe we'll cover those sections in today's class. So what does he say about why good leadership is important? I'm just going to read you something, and then we're going to get into it in a bit more detail. So this is the beginning. Diminishing returns happen when resources are invested in something that fails to turn a proportionately valuable profit. Now think about this in your own life, okay? I can even just feel it in my heart right now. I like to go into into things very deeply, because what I've seen in Krishna consciousness is that the statements of very advanced devotees, Prabhupada's books, they're so pregnant with meaning. And I just like to kind of really chew on something and get the full, it's almost like you want to get the full flavor, the full texture, the full experience out of what you're reading. This first statement is so significant in the life of every single devotee. What is being pointed out here, right, is the following. He says, that is, the returns become less over time and remain minimal or superficial. I was thinking about this in my own life, and I'm going to encourage you to think about this in yours. Where are we? Where are you and I getting what we call diminishing returns? Okay, so this is an exercise you can do in your own time. Yeah, maybe in your own time. Maybe we won't do it on the call. Maybe we will even come back to it. What I want you to think about is as follows. Prabhupada made this sutra, this statement. He said you have to become conscious before you can become Krishna conscious. In our lives as devotees, as we become aware, as we become more aware, what we start to do is we notice, we're sensitive to what is happening in different areas of our life. The pretext to this is that if we have been devotees who are already giving, right? That means we give, we serve, we take joy in giving. And then what we want to do, so that's point number one, we take joy in giving. So we're someone who's oriented towards giving. That's point number one. And then point number two, if we're devotees who want to see our service expand, that means we want to give more. So I'm giving, great. I want to give more. I want to give as much as possible. If we have this mentality and we're conscious, what tends to happen is it creates an awareness where we start to become sensitive in our life, and we start to see, where is there reciprocation? Where are things expanding? Where are things growing, right? And we also see, where are things diminishing? So what Bhakti Tirtha writes about here is diminishing returns. So as an exercise, what you can do is you can look at your life, you can look at your relationships, and you can see, where are things expanding or even maintaining nicely, and where are we giving time, energy, resources, and the service is going down. It's not growing. It's not being abundant, but rather it's just becoming less and less, because our time does not belong to us. Our time belongs to Krishna. So if we see that the time and energy that's being invested isn't making much of a return, and if we see that actually that time belongs to Krishna, then the question becomes, is this where Krishna wants me to be utilizing his time and energy? Or could I take that same time and energy, utilize it elsewhere, and offer more to Krishna? Okay, so this is a really key point in the life of a devotee. How can I best serve? Where can I best serve? The energy belongs to Krishna, the time belongs to Krishna. Where can I best invest his time and energy such that I can gain, or such that we can generate the greatest amount of service for him? It's very, very serious. It's very, very important that we think like that, and that we act like that, we meditate like that. Okay, we can't be sentimental in spiritual life. The reason why we can't be sentimental in spiritual life is because we are very limited, and our time and energy is limited. Therefore, it has to be utilized in the way that the owner will be best pleased. Let's read on. Okay. There are different types of governments or leadership systems, all of which are meant to maintain, organize, and oversee others. Each of these systems makes a significant impact on how the people working under them interact. This is very important. Each of these systems makes a significant impact on how the people working under them interact, grow, and achieve purpose in their lives. When leadership has no higher understanding, people in general become bewildered. This is really, really significant because we're living under a system. And because we've lived under a system since the moment we came out of the womb, that system also lives within us. This is really significant. Whatever you are exposed to again and again, and whatever you're exposed to directly and indirectly, it just becomes the modus operandi. It becomes the normal way of thinking for each and every one of us. So for example, under a capitalist system, the normal way of thinking is that success means money, because that's what we see. That's what we hear about. That's what's in the newspapers. That's what's on the, on the television, you see? So as we become more conscious, what we can do is we can start to introspect and think, okay, are those values that are within me, are they, how many of those values are actually the values of Krishna consciousness? How many of those values are the values of the soul proper, as opposed to things which have just been enculturated or have been placed into my mind? And the mind means literally the conscious level, the more superficial level. And ultimately, as they keep going through into the mind, it keeps going deeper and deeper. What things have been placed into my heart? And are those values healthy? Are those values helping me to grow and to develop as an individual? You see, it's really important to make this evaluation. It's very, very interesting. We see that people generally are increasingly materialistic. On one level, it's not their fault. If we grow up in a system where all the messages are that being materialistic is the way to be, is the only way to be, it's the only way that society can function, then it's no wonder that people will have this kind of mentality, in their hearts, because it's what they've been acculturated to believe. What Krishna consciousness gives us the ability to do is to now explore the values which are moving the heart and start to see, are they true or are they false? And Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj says, when leadership has no higher understanding, people become bewildered. Now he goes on to explain why. He says, the masses of people are basically subordinate by nature. I'll be very honest. I just sometimes I couldn't understand, how is he able to say stuff that's so in some ways controversial? Because if you told people that most people are subordinate by nature, they won't like that. They'll say, no, I'm an individual, I can make my own mind up. But actually what tends to happen is most people just follow the trends. That is actually true. And that mirrors the point that's made by Prabhupada in his books about the mass of people have more of a follower mentality. So whatever's going on, whatever trends are imposed by leadership, which is why we're talking about this, the vast majority of people will just tend to go along with it. Many great secular philosophers have understood this quality in most people. Voltaire surmised that because the masses are willingly subordinate, get that point, willingly subordinate, they tend to follow fads and whatever society deems normal at any given time. Now, this is very important. When Jiva Goswami gives the 10 praman or evidence that can be utilized, one of the evidence is anuman. So we can actually understand something by anuman, which means inference. If the majority of people are willingly subordinate, by definition, according to scripture, then what that means is the general patterns in any human society are largely shaped by what the leadership is doing. You see? Because if the majority of people are subordinate by nature, and they follow trends, then the next question is, who creates those trends? Because that means the majority of people are following the trend that's been created by the trend setters. And by definition, if you're a trend setter, right? If you're the person who's casting an influence that everyone else is following, it means by definition that you are, in some way, shape, or form at least, you're leading. Okay, so this is really significant. So the patterns that we see in modern society are actually the patterns that have been cast out by the leaders and adopted by the vast majority of people who have a natural tendency to go along with those patterns. Now, we understand from the Vedic literatures that the healthiest system of government is divine monarchy. In the material world, it is a system that God himself recommends, right? Now, this is, people don't like monarchy in modern society because they don't like authority. And they don't like this idea that someone is better, not better, because no one's better, but they don't like this idea that someone is in a higher position than someone else. Well, I actually challenge that. If you scratch beneath the surface, you'll find that no one has an issue with hierarchy as long as the hierarchy is one of servitude. So for example, no one has an issue that they have a parent, or parents, should be two at least, ideally. No one has an issue that they have parents, except when the parents are exploiting them. If the parents are loving, if the parents are giving shelter, if the parents are giving care, then everyone will be like, I'm so glad that I've got these parents. It's only when the parents are actually taking from the children, exploiting, manipulating the children, and if the parents are enforcing patterns upon the children, upon the subordinates, which are unhealthy, that's what causes the backlash against authority. And because in Kali Yuga, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of that, that is actually what's behind people's rejection or unwillingness to accept authority. So if they see authorities who are healthy, right? Not sentimental, that doesn't mean authorities will allow them to do whatever they want, because that in itself is unhealthy, right? If they see authorities who are actually healthy and kind and concerned for the well-being of others, there'll be no issue in accepting authority. That one thing will cause a sea change. It can change patterns in modern society. And as is said here, this is a system God recommends. So Krishna himself is a monarch, right? In Dwaraka, Krishna's a king, right? Krishna ultimately arranged the battle of Kurukshetra. Why? Because he wanted the Pandavas to be enthroned as the rulers of the entire world. Yeah, Yudhisthira was in that position. When the battle of Kurukshetra was won, Yudhisthira became the emperor of the entire planet. It's very significant. Now, this is now going to the next point, which is why the monarchy is not so often used. However, a monarchy is the most easily abused system of all. And when wrongly applied, it can become a source of social devastation. When those with a demoniac mentality rule, they create great disturbances by misusing their power. Consequently, although divine monarchy, properly executed, can offer the highest benefits to the people, it is presently more of an idea than a reality. I remember I was traveling with Bhakti Charumarj, and we were on our way back from the travels. We were at Zurich airport, and I was speaking to him, and I told him, someone who I know, a devotee who I know, had some concerns about certain leaders. And that devotee had told me their concerns, what if this leader, what if anything happens to them, then it will devastate so many others, etc. And I just shared this with Bhakti Charumarj. And he said, people who speak like this are people who don't think. He told me that. He said to me, he said, we work on the basis that people will succeed, not on the basis that they will fail, which I thought was a very interesting statement. The point he was making is that, and he gave me many examples, he said, would this project have been a success if it wasn't for the leadership of this particular person? Would this project have been a success if it wasn't for the leadership of this particular person? And what he said really got me thinking, that when you have this idea of this model. It's a model of divine monarchy. That means you have someone in the position of leadership and they are actually qualified. They actually are a leader. They actually do care about their dependents. They actually do want to see the growth of those people who they're serving, right? They're not sentimental, which is one extreme, but they're also not overly, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not overly compliant, right? Which is the other toxic extreme, where they'll just allow people to do anything and everything, right? When they have a healthy sense of what's right and what's wrong, when they have a healthy sense of integrity, then they can really do something to help the society to really grow and flourish, right? So again, the model of divine monarchy, when the person who sits in that position is also qualified, and to be honest, when the people who are under them have some quality, so they recognize, actually, yeah, they're a good leader, right? So when you have a qualified leader and qualified followers, then this system is the best. But when you have an unqualified leader, actually, even when you have unqualified followers, the whole thing can become a mess. I was helping one community, and there was an issue that came up about the leadership, but the leader was actually well-intentioned. The leader was well-intentioned. I'm not sure whether that leader was maybe always as competent, but they were well-intentioned. They really wanted to do what's best. But I think to some extent, the followers also didn't have proper understanding. So they were always very upset with the leader. And they basically put a lot of pressure on the leader, and the leader stepped down, And I was thinking about this, how revolutionary it would be if leaders were trained, and along with training leaders, the followers were trained as to how to understand and how to identify a qualified leader, right? Because then what it does is it sets the expectation. Our frustrations in life are usually because we have the wrong expectation. You see, and our expectations, instead of the expectations being based upon scripture, they're just based upon what we've seen on television or on social media, or just some concoction of the mind. And for a person whose expectations are not based upon scripture, you will never be happy, because you expect the material energy to give you something that it is absolutely incapable of giving. You see? And this is really, really significant. It's very, very significant. We have to calibrate what we can expect according to scripture. And if we do that, then you judge things realistically. And then your heart becomes peaceful, because you're not like, for example, many people, I was speaking sometimes to younger generation people, and they think that they're like, a job is going to completely satisfy them. It's not going to completely satisfy you. There will always be aspects of work that are not completely satisfying, because you don't have a system in the world which is set up according to Krishna's organization. You don't have Daivi Varnashram. And even in Daivi Varnashram, there are always duties, responsibilities, along with rights. You see, the only thing that can completely satisfy the self is pure Krishna consciousness. The only thing that can completely fulfill, that can give complete contentment to the heart, to the soul, is pure Krishna consciousness. Where work can come in is that if someone, to the extent that it's available, because you have to be realistic about this too, to the extent that it's available, if one can act according to their nature, either in the workplace or outside of it, that can give a little bit of psychological peace. Yeah, that can make one a bit more psychologically peaceful. Of course, Krishna consciousness can give that too, even if one isn't working to their nature. But then you have to be practicing to a higher level for that. Anyway, the point is that there can be some psychological peace if one is situated properly. But the real point is that the fullness of the heart comes by only Krishna consciousness. And if we have the wrong expectation, then you can do any job, anywhere, with anyone, and we will always feel that there is something missing. Anyway, I don't want to diverge on that. So Krishna's system is the best when the leader is qualified and the followers are qualified. Now, if either the leader is unqualified or the followers are unqualified, then that same system can become a complete mess. And I'll give you an example of how this can work badly if the leader is qualified, but the followers are unqualified. If the leader is qualified, he or she may provide things for the followers, but the followers just don't want to listen, right? So, and also if the followers are unqualified, what happens is they become, instead of being interdependent, they become codependent. That, in other words, the followers become lazy and they just expect the leader to do everything for them without them reciprocating. You see, that's a sign that the followers are unqualified. So then, instead of the leader actually being someone who coordinates things to make sure that everyone rises up, the followers think, you know what, the leader's really good. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do my part. And then everything should just work out. And if everything doesn't work out, then I won't first think, did I do what I'm meant to be doing? I'll just think the leader's bad and we'll get rid of him. Now, of course, what Krishna will do in a situation like that is that because the followers are cheating, they have a cheating mentality, what Krishna will do is he will actually allow this to happen. He will allow them to get rid of a qualified leader so that they will then have someone who's unqualified leading them. And when they have an unqualified leader, they'll suffer. And then what they will do through this, what will happen through the suffering is that they'll realize when we were under this previous person, things were so much better. We got rid of him and now we're under this person and now we have even less and we're being exploited, you know? So it's a very powerful point that Prabhupada makes about the cheaters and the cheated. We have to always, first of all, the first thing that we should do in every area of our lives is make sure we're sincere, because the sincerity acts like a magnet. If we're sincere in our Krishna consciousness, in our service, Krishna will draw like quality to us. If we're insincere, if we have a cheating mentality, then actually Krishna can allow us to be cheated because because that's our nature. We're cheating, so Krishna allows us to be cheated. So these are really important subtleties that we should be aware of. Okay, I'll just answer your question now. What about when we have good managers, but then they get transferred, not promoted? So that can also be karma if we're talking about it on the material level. If we're talking about it on the spiritual level, and it's something outside of our control, we have to take it that for some higher purpose, Krishna has allowed this to happen. And what we do is we try to see, even through this situation, how can I continue to improve on my endeavor to glorify Guru and Krishna, right? A sincere devotee uses everything, including reversals, as an opportunity to glorify Guru and Krishna even more. Okay, let's read on. Other systems of government, therefore, may work better for the current times, and some of these will now be considered. But remember that these are second best. A divine monarchy, when led by a person who is actually qualified, will bestow the greatest benefits on those who live under its shelter. So this is where we are in the material world, and it's a principle. See, there's the ideal according to Guru Sadhu Shastra, but when that ideal is pursued in the material world, sometimes because of the limitations in modern society, sometimes we have to think, okay, how do we get as close to this ideal as possible? And there's a subtlety to this. When we say, how do I get as close to the ideal as possible? There's two ways of getting close to the ideal, and this is really important. The first and most important way to get close to the ideal is to get close to the spirit of the ideal, right? The substance of the ideal. The second way is the form. Okay, so what do I mean by this? So we say that because divine monarchy can be misused, and because we may not have so many qualified leaders in the world, right? Or because we don't have so many qualified followers in the world, that therefore we can't do divine monarchy as a system in the world, right? Because people may not vote for people may not vote for a pure devotee to be in charge. You see, even though they are a pure devotee, if the people are unqualified, they'll think, oh, he's going to make me vegetarian. I'm not going to listen to him. That they won't necessarily recognize it. So we may not use divine monarchy, but then we see what's best. Now, the way we determine what's best is what would get us close to the same outcomes as we would get in a divine monarchy. So that's what I mean by the substance. It's actually by what, if we can't use divine monarchy, what system can we use that will get us as close as possible to the best outcome for everyone concerned? You see, it's the substance of it that we look at first. Second is the form, right? So it's not what system looks as close to divine monarchy as divine monarchy. The form is secondary. It's what's going to achieve the purpose. I'll give you an example. In our scriptures, it talks about how the wife should be submissive and just follow the husband. Okay. Now, many of you on the call, some of you on the call have children. I think Rax, you definitely have children, right? Some of you don't, but you can understand this intellectually. If you had a daughter, would you tell your daughter that according to the Bhagavatam, the wife should just be submissive and depend on the husband? So would you tell your daughter, whatever your husband tells you to do, you should just do it? You probably wouldn't tell her that, because you'd understand, okay, but what if he's not qualified? He may exploit that ability, that willingness to follow, you see? So the point that you'd make is that she should try to serve the husband, right? But it shouldn't be in a blind way. And actually what you'll find is that the submissiveness and that following and that serving will be healthy actually to the degree that the husband's actually qualified. You see, that's the beauty of the Vedic literature. It's a set of principles. And if you know the language, you know how to make it work. Yeah, so you tell your daughter, yeah, follow him, because to the extent that he's qualified, to that extent, you should actually follow. But where he's not qualified, if you follow, it'll be detrimental to you and to him. You see? So this is how the Vedic literature actually works. So in the same way, okay, we may not be able to have that divine monarchy, okay, but we try to do it as well as possible. We try to get as close as possible to the same outcomes using another system. And this is what we're going to start talking about now. So systems of government. So socialism is a system that allows for the means of production and distribution to be owned and controlled collectively. In theory, socialism is meant to lead to communism, a doctrine that allows for all property to be owned and controlled by the community. A communist society is ideally classless, but in communist societies we have seen in recent history, the state is controlled by a totalitarian regime. They have been atheistic, and the totalitarian government has imposed its policies upon the people, quote unquote, for their own good, with no room for differences. Now, I'm going to make a comment on this. In the world that we live in today, people have an issue with hierarchy. But hierarchy is absolutely natural. Okay? It's never the case that everyone is the same. And the idea that everyone is the same is actually, it's a misconception. There will be some people who are naturally better than others in administration. There'll be some people who are naturally better than others in terms of intellectual and philosophical pursuits. There'll be some people who are naturally better than other people in terms of artistic engagement. And there are some people who are better than others naturally in terms of business and business management. So it's not a question of, so let me put it this way, you can never get rid of hierarchy. And the endeavor, because this is what happened in socialism, when they tried to get rid of hierarchy, the only way that they were able to, the only way that it could be done, and this is even going on in the modern society, the only way to get rid of hierarchy is to suppress other people. In order to make everything equal, the only way that one is able to do that is you have to hold down certain people who, if you allowed them to act according to their own propensities, would naturally be leaders in a particular area, in a particular field, you see? So this is something to be very careful of. What we see in a careful study of the scriptures is that when you repress something, it builds up pressure. Like, you know, so you have a pressure cooker, the lid's there, there's pressure building up. Now, if you just were to throw the lid off, you know, unceremoniously at any point in time, you'd have literally a pop, because the pressure's building up. It just keeps building, and then ultimately, bang, something explodes. Because what you're doing is what we're doing is we're repressing the natural state of an individual. Now, the other extreme is also true. It doesn't mean that people should be allowed to do whatever they want. For a healthy expression of a natural state of an individual, there needs to be two things. There needs to be room for the individual to engage in their duties or responsibilities. But for it to work in a healthy, harmonious social way, that individual has to also understand, along with their responsibilities, the boundaries. They have to understand their boundaries and their responsibilities. So you can perform your duties, but you can do it within this healthy boundary. Then it really works. Yeah. If there's boundless, then what happens is a person may encroach on other people's healthy space. So that's one extreme. If it's too restricted, then the individual can't really express their propensities and gifts in the way that Krishna would want them to. That's also another extreme. So you always have this polarity of balance, rights and responsibilities, right? These two things have to go together in a healthy way. And so this idea of a socialist system, it failed ultimately because it was going against the reality. And that's the law, by the way. You can tell if something is going to fail or succeed over the long term by seeing, is this aligned to the truth? If it's aligned to the truth, it can have what's the word I'm looking for? If something is aligned to the truth, it can have longevity over the long term. If it's not aligned to the truth, it can never have longevity over the long term. I was thinking about this a lot. I was exploring different situations in Krishna consciousness, and I was thinking, what's the truth of this situation? And I was seeing, okay, that's not the truth. That's not the reality. And because it's not the reality, it's not going to last. Yeah, ultimately, something will come, it will fall apart. And I was realizing that it's really powerful. Okay, reading on. Another government system is dictatorship. A dictator will inevitably exploit the people to ensure his or her own power. Those who do not accept the dictator's rule are punished. People are literally forced to accept the dictator's policies. History has shown that dictators are often egomaniacal, with little concern for anything beyond their own personal agendas. Under such a regime, people in general feel exploited and unhappy. So what happens with that type of leadership? Ultimately, when people feel exploited or unhappy, because they're the majority, and if you do a careful study of history, you'll see this also, because they're the majority and they feel unhappy, eventually what they'll do is they'll band together and they'll literally tear down the dictator. So you'll sometimes see where people are oppressed or repressed for a long time, even a leader usually emerges amongst those repressed people, and that leader leads the charge with the group, and they literally tear down their oppressors. So again, a very, very dangerous system because it goes against the reality and the truth. Okay, then there is oligarchy, which means rule by a few. These few then select leaders among themselves. For example, the masses do not select their leaders. Rather, the members themselves have power of attorney to select their chairman, vice chairman, treasurer, and other officers. Some organizations and communities look towards oligarchy as a viable way to run themselves because they realize both the need for strong leadership and the possibility of exploitative leadership. Oligarchy provides a community with the semblance of a monarch. This is very interesting. Although after a certain time, the power rotates to another leader in their governing system. This system allows communities to minimize the possibility of dictatorship by setting in place a more thorough monitoring system. Now, this is actually the system that we generally use in ISKCON. Right? So the GBC is a group of leaders who have collective responsibility to lead the movement. And it's a system that Prabhupada instituted. And you can see very interestingly, it's not quite the same as divine monarchy. When Prabhupada was on the planet, you could say it was divine monarchy within our movement, because he was a divine monarch. He was a qualified leader. Now, having said that, he's still put in place a GBC under him, you see, because he knew I have to set up something that can work in my absence. But it's the idea that rather than one person, because that person may or may not be qualified, or the followers may not be qualified to see that that person is qualified and therefore they won't follow. You see, that's one thing. So he set up this GBC system. So you get some of the benefits, you get as close to a divine monarchy, but what's added is this element of monitoring, which means that if the person in charge is off, they're not going to be able to cause such a calamity because they're not singularly in control. Yeah? Okay, let's read on. There is also democracy. In some respects, democracy is the most dangerous system of all. I have to say, I love the way that Bhakti Maharaj writes this, because generally everyone would say democracy is the best system. I mean, I'm talking in the secular world because everyone's deciding things by their voting. But actually, he'll go on to explain why it's so dangerous. In a communistic government, at least, there is only one direction in which a society can go, the direction chosen by the totalitarian government. Under a totalitarian regime, both policies and the citizens' roles are clearly defined. There is no ambiguity about goals or direction. This is really important. There needs to be clarity. You see, we're having in the modern world a crisis of democracy because there's no unity. Yes, diversity is actually diversity is a trait or an aspect of reality. But diversity without unity, which is also a trait of reality, means that you're being unrealistic, because the reality is both unity and diverse, is both united and diverse. The reality has common factors that we all share, and it has the individuality that we all have, as each person is a soul. So a system of government has to honor both sides. If it just honors that everyone has diversity and it does it too much, then you can never have harmony, because everyone will do their own thing and it will clash with someone else. At the same time, if you just try to make everyone the same and uniform, again, it won't work because people are unique. So you have to have a system that honors and reflects healthy unity, right? The healthy side of unity, the healthy aspect, which is where do we all have a common ground, common purpose, common needs. And it has to also give space for people to express their individuality in a healthy way. I was speaking to some friends. I'm just gonna say this honestly. I was speaking to some friends and they were increasingly expressing some concern about a certain span of leadership. And they were all saying similar things, to be honest, which was very, very powerful. I could understand Krishna. He's so incredible. He's teaching us so many lessons through this experience. And what they were seeing in relation to what we discussed earlier was this idea of diminishing returns, that we're giving so much and it's not being reciprocated with properly. What they were feeling is they were feeling that they weren't being protected, right? So that was another issue that was coming up. And they were also feeling a sense in which they were just being made into like, almost like just another face in the crowd, that, you know, just do whatever you're told. So there wasn't a healthy honoring of individuality. It was more like you're all just meant to just do whatever you're told to do. Now, we are meant to serve. We are meant to serve selflessly. So we have to be very careful about this. It's not an excuse to be like, I'm not going to do that service. I just don't want to do it. It's not like that at all. We're meant to be in that spirit of readiness to serve selflessly. It's really important. But along with that spirit of serving selflessly, my Guru Maharaj put it like this. He said that the devotees should be ready to serve. At the same time, the leadership should try to also coordinate that service in ways which are really healthy and bring up the community of people who are trying to serve. So we have to do both things at the same time. Yeah, okay, so let's carry on. Yeah, so we talked about the ambiguity about goals or direction. People need to have clear direction, clear goals, and it should be based upon scripture. Life under a democratic government, however, is more vague. Democracy is defined as a government for the people and by the people, but such a government is actually impossible to achieve under this system. Democracy is based upon which party or group has the greater influence, which can mean that the group with the most money to spend on advertising will generally win. Democracy doesn't really bring equality to the citizens, although it pretends to. This is it. If you were to try to run for president of the United States or prime minister and you don't have money, forget it. You see, that's the first hurdle. It's not whether you've got good character. There are many people who've got good character, but if they don't have resources, they can't promote themselves. And therefore, it doesn't matter that you've got good character. You can't go anywhere. So this is really key. This is why the democracy doesn't work, ultimately. You see? And actually, if you look at it carefully, what it will mean is the people who are able to have the influence are the people who are able to be good at making money. Therefore, in the modern capitalist societies, usually those in power are usually those who are more business savvy. And if they're more business savvy, the great likelihood, and it can happen in any community actually, and it usually happens in most communities, and therefore those who are in charge tend to be those who are more business minded. And because they're more business minded, they tend to arrange the dynamics in such a way that it makes them a profit. It tends to be thought of and experienced in that particular way. I was thinking about this model that we shared about the 4 Varnas. We have a podcast called The Team Model. And I was meditating on those who are business minded, the entrepreneur mindset, and something very interesting came. You see, what is that mindset? The mindset is, I call it the effort to output ratio. So someone who's good at business, their mentality is such that they're able to quickly see, where can I get the most output for the minimum input? And that works fantastically in terms of business. It works fantastically in terms of investing, because that's what business people are good at doing. Business resources, investing. So investment is exactly that. It's the ability, I'm gonna put in £1,000 in this particular situation, and over time, I'm gonna get out £10,000 or £20,000 or £1 million. So it's the effort to output ratio. So it can work very well in business, it can work very well in investment, but it can become very toxic when it's applied to personal relationships. Because then I'm thinking, where can I give as little to this person who I'm in relationship with while taking out as much as possible from that same person? And then of course, what does that mean? It means that the individual then feels exploited. You see, so that's why it's problematic. Okay, let's read on. Democracy has been referred to as demon crazy. That is because there is an inherent and essential flaw in its methods. Reality is not dictated by majority vote. This is really powerful. See, again, going back to what we said earlier. So if I've got money, I can influence people en masse. By influencing people en masse, I can sell my idea to people. I may even be able to manipulate people to think that whatever I say is the best idea. And then now that you're manipulated as a majority, you will then vote for my idea. But you voted for my idea because I had enough money to advertise my idea and to persuade all of you that my idea was the best. Whereas if I didn't have the money to persuade you en masse, and if we had to do it on a one-to-one, my idea would not actually be considered to be the best idea. If I didn't have more money to advertise to more people, if everyone was equal in terms of no one has more money than the other person, we're just going to judge it on the strength of the idea itself. You see, if everything else was equal and we just evaluate the idea. It's not who's got more influence, who's got more money, who's got more power. It's just like we're just going to each person puts their ideas on the table, and we look at each idea on its own merits. Then it would have a very, very different result. We have to be very realistic. This is how the world actually works. Okay, so the reality is not dictated by majority. So the reality is dictated by Krishna, and it's given by Krishna in the scriptures. So the real thing that would work in a deep, long-term way where people would feel deeply fulfilled would be to actually look first, what does Krishna say? And then how can we, as much as possible, implement what Krishna says? And how does that work for us practically in our lives? It means, what does Krishna say through Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra? You see, the macrocosm is Daivi Varnashram. The microcosm is the Vaishnava dealing between Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, and the living and the devotee. So our contribution to making the world a better place is to strictly follow the instructions that were given to us by our spiritual masters and those who are representatives of our spiritual master. Let's read on. Okay, democracy has been referred to as demon crazy. Actually, no, let's go back. Yeah, sorry. I'll read the sentence again. Democracy has been referred to as a demon crazy. That is because there is an inherent and essential flaw in its methods. Reality is not dictated by majority vote. That is, simply because the majority agree on a particular course of action does not make that action the proper way to go. Please, please, please notice this. This is so politically incorrect, but it's correct. See, it's not just because the majority of people think something's a good idea that it's a good idea. And to be really honest, this also applies to devotees. It's not just because the majority of the devotees agree on something that it's a good idea. You see, it has to be, what actually makes something a good idea is that the more enlightened a person is, the more spiritually insightful, right? And I'm making even a subtle distinction between advancement and insightful. Advancement is important, but insightful means you're advanced spiritually in terms of understanding what Krishna wants in a particular area. You see, this is really key, and that makes a real difference. Okay. For example, if a group of children were to vote on how many days per week they wish to attend school, there would be few school days in a year. Similarly, when the people tend to be of both mundane quality, that's one disqualification, and misinformed about the goal of life, that's another disqualification. They will agree on a substandard and irreligious lifestyle and cause disturbance in society. Clearly, popular vote is not the best way to discern right from wrong. I mean, I'll tell you what happened this morning. It was so interesting. I just saw something. I have a friend who's a devotee, and he works for a pharmaceutical company. When the pandemic started in 2020, I gave a talk. And I'll be honest, I shared some things that my Guru Maharaj has been saying over 20 years ago about how the biggest industries in the world are which make the most billions of dollars are the defense industry and the pharmaceutical industry. And he said that we've become a society that has become more and more expert in how to destroy ourselves many times over, while also narcoticizing ourselves to diminish the pain of our materialistic materialistically unfulfilling life. He was explaining that point. So I was explaining similar points. And then this friend of mine, he messaged me, I think it was soon after that talk, and he was saying, actually, I work for the pharmaceutical industry. You know, they have a bad reputation, but it's not really like that. They do try to do what's best for society, etc. And to be honest, I thought, he's saying that he works for a pharmaceutical company. But does he really know what goes on within that company? Because there's a way in which companies are structured whereby certain decisions can be taken at the top. But by the time it gets down to you, who's at a much lower level of decision making, the people at the top can give a story or a narrative that's justifying what they're doing, but it may be very different to the truth of why they're doing it. So this morning, I came across a video, and if you would like to look at it, it's quite damning if I'm really honest with you. And it was giving some examples, and this is increasingly coming out. It was giving many examples of how the pharmaceutical industry can be absolutely ruthless. I mean, it was ruthless. And the video, if you want to watch it, is called Gravitas Plus: How Big Pharma Pushes. I'm just gonna see the name. How Big Pharma Pushes Dangerous Drugs and Reaps Profits. And it was giving an example of someone who was sent to prison. Well, they'd actually misled, I think, the government about certain pharmaceutical drugs. Actually, this person came in to work for this one pharmaceutical company, and the medicine which had been previously sold for one amount, the person raised the price and sold it for much, much more, and it caused outrage. Anyway, to cut a long story short, that person went to prison. He was found to have done some other, let's say, illegal dealings as well. But it got me thinking about that, because what they had done is they'd controlled the government, they controlled the narrative, they tried to discredit people who had told the truth that this drug is actually, there's some issue here, or it should not be used in a particular way, etc., etc. And because of money, they had the power and the influence to have this control. You see how it works? But their agenda was just money. So they already had money, and they used that money to push a narrative and to influence in a way that would make them more money. Whereas in the Vedic system, the agenda is actually Krishna first, and of course connected to Krishna, because what's pleasing to Krishna is also good for the living entity. So it's Krishna and his devotees. With the agenda is Krishna and his devotees, with an understanding that everyone is a devotee, everyone is part of Krishna's family. No one can be mistreated or should be mistreated. So it's a very, very different way of looking at the world. Anyway, let's just read on, and then we'll stop in a moment for questions and comments. Okay, let's see. So we talked about the disqualification, that when people are of mundane quality and misinformed, they'll agree to irreligious, substandard lives and so on. Okay, so clearly popular vote is not the best way to discern right from wrong. There is another type of democracy that many New Age people are investigating in their attempt to develop communities, the idea of total consensus. This style of leadership is also dangerous. To reach total consensus requires continuous discussion and processing until everyone agrees. The end result looks as if everyone is satisfied, but this is really not the case. By the time total consensus is reached, many people have become tired and have given up on the issues at hand. Most of them settle for almost any resolution just so they can move on to other pursuits. Therefore, many unhealthy compromises take place, most of which do not guarantee the greatest good for all concerned. The decision of unanimous choice ends up being whatever people are finally ready to accept. We often find this model in communities that are trying to create a sense of concern for every member, but without, and this is the key point, without an understanding of higher principles, their attempts amount to little more than misplaced sentiment. So we have to be soft and hard at the same time. Soft-hearted means that we really want what's best for other people. And hard means we're hardly aligned. We're firmly aligned with the principles given by Krishna through Guru Sadhu Shastra. Really, the good leadership asks the question, what does Guru say? What does Sadhu say? What does Shastra say? And then it's how do we align with that? How do we do that in a healthy way according to time, place, and circumstance and individual? And that's a formula, by the way, that's a sutra. If in your spiritual life, if as a spiritual leader, you're thinking, what does Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra say? And how do we enact that according to time, place, circumstance, and individual in the way that is healthy and in a way that is as healthy and inspiring as possible? If you do that one sutra, your leadership becomes empowered. Okay, on this point, I'm going to stop here, and I'm just going to pause and ask, are there any comments or questions in for the session today? Any comments or questions? By the way, welcome Pratiksa and Nandini. Thank you for joining. Good to see you. Prema Govinda, good to see you. Dylan, I didn't see you guys earlier, so just Haribol.
Hare Krishna, BBD.
Haribol Rights, the natural leader. How can I serve you?
From it, but this session kind of reflects what's currently going on the macro level with Russia and the West. And it was just like, I know you were saying what's currently going on, but it was just like, even in democracy, while they're trying to take on Putin, he's like, people have their opinions, but these were classic examples on that front. Yeah. The question that I've really been thinking about in reality is, when we think about previous yugs, there's predominantly been one main demon, and there might be small little demons, right? But then in this yug, we've got so many small demons and really small demons, and it's bad. And it's like, how do you elevate, or the question what I was asking myself, what would I prefer? Knowing that I've got to deal with one demon, but I'm under the protection of a Vedic king or something. Because at the moment, who are our strong leaders there to defend? You said you need to be a qualified follower to follow a qualified leader. So I'm on a world stage, I'm like thinking, who is truly a qualified leader or on that front? And then when you was talking about democracy, what might be a popular opinion, like the Brexit, and by the end of it, they just wanted to move on, and it came, and now we're still having issues on that front. So I was just thinking it on a macro level, and yeah, more of a comment than a question in there, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a great comment. See that, and it echoes what I said before. See, it's a rot from the root upwards, because if the people are not qualified in the first place, they will never allow a qualified leader to come in. You see, because a qualified leader is going to tell them the truth, and it may not always be touchy-feely. What will happen instead is someone who sees, all right, this person's a qualified leader, he's going to tell you the truth, and it won't always be palatable. I'm going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you you can have everything. I'm going to tell you you can have it all. Even though it may not be true, I will tell you whatever you want to hear just because I'm hungry for power. So then what you have is, if you have people who are very, let's say, innocent in one sense, and you've got one person telling them the truth, right? You can't have everything, just like, when we're young, right? The parents sometimes tell you stuff that you don't want to hear, but they love you. That's why they tell you stuff that you don't want to hear. But if I'm childish, mom's telling me I can't eat sweets all the time. But my uncle, he's going to tell me that, he'll buy me as many sweets as I want if I do this for him. So because of my own immaturity, I'm more inclined to listen to my uncle than my parent, you see? But in the short term, it feels like, yeah, I'm going to get what I want. I'm not listening to mum, I'll listen to uncle. But actually, in the long term, I'm going to be sick. In the long term, I'm going to end up in hospital. In the long term, all my teeth are going to fall out. And it's only in the long term that I realize, you know what? Maybe I made a mistake to listen to my uncle, but by then it's too late. So this is why it's tricky, because if the people are unqualified, they won't allow a qualified leader to come in, to become in charge, you see, and they will eventually realize it was a mistake. But then what they will eventually realize, okay, this person's no longer doing what we want. It's a mistake to have him in. But then they will just elect another unqualified person. You see, and that's the issue. It doesn't even guarantee that they'll let a qualified person in. It will just mean that after a certain point, they'll get fed up with the unqualified person who's now obviously unqualified, and then they're going to replace him or her with another unqualified person. It's a bad situation. The only thing that can break the cycle is mercy from Krishna. So that's why we are helping the world as devotees if we do our service properly and we try to become as pure as possible, because it will bring an influx of spiritual energy into the world, which can break open the new possibilities. And those new possibilities can allow, in some way, shape, or form, more qualified people to come up. And it's those qualified, it's those qualified people who can actually start to make who can help from the top down, although we can also help from the bottom up as well. The other thing we can do is reach out to people who are open to our influence and who are in positions of power and help them to become more qualified. That's the other thing that can be done. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
You. Okay, any other questions or comments?
Just a follow-up question. So in theory, where we're your mentees and we work all in different sectors, the opportunity for us is trying to aspire for those leadership positions corporately, because it's an indirect service, but at the same time to work on our sadhana in hindsight to change that side. So make the corporates, the company, your kingdom, and take it through that. Just remix it away in some respect.
That's your specific responsibility, Rax. You have that nature. The actual formula is twofold. First of all, we should try to do our Krishna consciousness as well as possible, because then what Krishna will do is he can open doors for us. And what that does is also, it means that we can access situations that may be beyond what we're actually qualified for by his mercy. So that's the first, and that's the most important. The second is that we do our duty, our dharma. You see, so first make sure we're Krishna conscious, and then second, and when I say dharma, it means what would be pleasing to Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and what's possible for you. So first, I'm trying to become as pure as I can, and then along with that, I'm thinking, okay, what did Guru Maharaj tell me? What did Sadhu and Shastra tell me? And you move into that field. So for example, some people can influence the entire world through their intellectual contribution. Some people can influence the entire world through taking a position of leadership responsibility. Someone else can influence the entire world through business. The power, though, is that we have to do what we're meant to be doing for Krishna's pleasure. The difficulty comes when we don't, and Krishna mentions this point twice in the Bhagavad Gita. The difficulty comes when we don't do what we're meant to be doing. Then what interestingly, I was discussing with a devotee this morning, when we don't do what we're meant to be doing for Krishna, we'll feel awkward, we'll feel disturbed when we see other people shining. We'll feel disturbed when we see other people doing what they're meant to be doing for Krishna. And that disturbance is good, by the way, because it will remind us the reason why you're disturbed about this person doing what they're doing so well is because you're not doing what you're meant to be doing for Krishna. You see? And of course, it's a journey. Don't get me wrong, it's a journey. So when we say doing what we're meant to be doing for Krishna, it's a journey. So at different stages in that journey, there's different things that we're meant to be doing. So in one stage of the journey, it's what I'm meant to be doing now for Krishna is learning the philosophy, learning to become a servant, right? So at this stage, that's what I'm meant to be doing. And later on, I'll take on a particular service, right? Maybe now I'm doing things generally because that's what I'm meant to be doing for Krishna at this stage in my journey. At a different stage in the journey, I'm meant to be doing something else for Krishna. Right? So I've been trained sufficiently. Now I'm going to step up in this way for Krishna. So that's how the whole thing actually works, and it's so powerful. This is real. This is real. If you're in your day-to-day life, if you try to serve Krishna properly, I've seen this in my own life. Also, Krishna reveals stuff. It's incredible. He'll show you, she'll show you, I want you to move in this direction. And of course, we never allowed the mind to be the only authority. We always make sure that it's confirmed by Guru, by Sadhu, and by Shastra. That way we know it's not our imagination, right? So it's always Guru, Sadhu, Shastra to confirm this is what Krishna wants you to do, right? The spiritual masters told you, great, I'll do that, right? Sadhu, you know, the spiritual uncles, they're also confirming, yes, Rax, you should be moving this direction, or for you, you should just focus right now on doing this. That's how you do it. And then amazing things will happen as a result. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you for that.
Thank you for that question. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Okay, so I think we are at time. Thank you very much. I'll be honest, it's a real pleasure to even discuss this topic with you, because in discussing it, I feel a sense of satisfaction, and that we're churning it and learning more and more. And so the takeaways for the session is that there is this ultimate sutra. The ultimate sutra is we're trying to purify ourselves according to the instructions of Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. And based upon those instructions, we're trying to be actively engaging in service as well. So it's the purification of the heart. That's the internal dimension. And it's the active engagement in service according to the orders of Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, in a way that's, that's really Krishna conscious. And all the miracles happen from there. Yeah, whenever you see devotees who are doing well, and when I say doing well, by the way, I don't even just mean externally, right? That may or may not be a thing, but actually if they're doing well, they feel a sense of real enthusiasm and satisfaction in their spiritual life. Yeah, that's the real marker. Keshava Bharati Maharaj, he asked Prabhupada, how do you know that Krishna is pleased? And he was expecting Prabhupada to say the answer that Prabhupada normally gave. Normally, Prabhupada said, you'll know that Krishna is pleased when the spiritual master is pleased. On this occasion, Prabhupada said to him, he said, you'll know that Krishna is satisfied when you're satisfied. And then Keshava Bharati expanded on this point when he was just sharing this pastime, that because Krishna is in your heart, when you're doing what you're meant to be doing, you feel, oh yeah, I feel good. I feel like, yeah, and that can come because you're chanting properly. It can come because you're reading properly. It can come because you're hearing properly. It can come because you're serving properly. So you're trying to do things more and more for his pleasure purely. And you're trying to do that, and everything else comes from there. I'll tell you honestly, just by sharing this stuff about the leadership, I can feel like, yeah, I feel good. It's like, yeah, this is what I'm meant to be doing this, right? So you get that sense. I mean, this is not the only thing I'm meant to be doing, but Krishna's like, you get that sense. You feel a sense of, yeah, I feel good. I feel like, yeah, this is you feel a deeper satisfaction. Yeah. So anyway, we'll stop there. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. And all glories to His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. We're just using this book, Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness Part 2. You can get this on Amazon if anyone is interested. Wishing you all the best. Take care, and we'll continue in the next session.